Good morning, guys. Today's reading is going to be for April 18th, and we're in 2 Kings, and I'm doing chapter 14 and 15. And I just want you guys to just like for this particular year, especially being that I'm a couple of days behind. Yesterday was Sunday, and just being in this book right now, one of the songs that we sang at worship yesterday was proclaiming who Jesus was, and it was saying that he was David's root. And it was one of those things that, in singing that song, because it said, all of the authority that Jesus had and was given, but even in like the reading that we have going on now, and especially in these last two chapters that we're covering today, which is 14, 15. It's like that being from David's root is so important because that was a promise that God had gave to David. And we see that now as we have new kings that are coming up in Israel, that God is still looking for David's heart. And that's the thing that's not being found. So it's just actually being in your word and, attending church and worshiping. Like all of these things will come together and just give you that much of a greater experience. I just wanted to put that out there as we're encouraged to keep getting up and getting into our word, learning how to even give God our first, because first fruits is something that's just repetitively seen as something that God is asking of us, because we see that we serve a God that holds nothing back from us. So getting in the habit of giving him our first fruits is only going to have like that much of a greater benefit to our lives of blessing to be able to pour out and be bigger blessings to others, because ultimately that should always be our desire with everything. Whenever we're putting aside time to spend with God, it's about getting to know Him better so that we can live our best lives and then we could be our best selves to the people that God puts us in front of. So let's dig in because it is so much going on. Lord Jesus, I was reading this and I'm like, God, what's going on? So it starts out with we have the king Jeroboam, right? And so that morning his son wakes up and he's very sick. And this is what I gotta get better at. Okay. So Jeroboam was the 10 other tribes, because remember now Israel is separated, and that becomes important in the next chapter, right? But we see that his son is sick. So he remembered that there was the prophet that had came to him and let him know that he was the one that was going to be raised up and he was going to be king, right? And so his son is sick, so he sends his wife, and he does it to be in a deceiving manner. But before his wife could even get there, God had already let the prophet know that she was coming. So even though this prophet was older, we can still see that his relationship with God was what was prominent, because as she approached his doorstep, he called her in by who she was. And he asked, why is it that you want to deceive me, right? So it was one of those things where, regardless of everything that was going on the outside, the prophet knew how important his relationship with was God. And he remained faithful in his place and in his position. And so he was still able to be used by God, right? And so one of the things that he said to her was that God definitely had a message for him. And one of the things, like the way I started out talking about David, it said like when he was talking to her husband, it was that you have not been like my servant David, who obeyed my commands and followed me with all his heart and always did whatever I wanted. So we see that David exemplified something that God desired. And that was where a lot of the promises went from, because God was continuing to look for that person who observed his commands and followed him with all his heart and always did whatever he wanted. So God always desires anybody that he puts to lead over his people to have a heart that remains after him regardless of what's going on. Let it remain, let it be obedient to his commands, right? And so we know that one of the things that Jeroboam did was that he built those calves because he wanted to give the people some place to go worship so that they wouldn't desire to reunite with Judah to go to where the temple was. And so for God, that was like the greatest offense ever. And it was something that we see continually popping up when people don't really understand how to get to God and how to access Him. It's almost like they're confident and quick to put something in His place. And for God, that is the biggest obscenity toward Him, right? And so now we see the news only got worse because the child that she came to ask about, God was like, he will definitely die. But the only good thing about that child was it was said that he would be the only one who would have a decent burial. And it was one of those things where he said that the rest of your sons will be killed, they will be slaughtered, right? And this is all because of the poles that, they set up for worship. Like, that was one of the biggest things, putting other idols in the place of God was the biggest offense. And then it was like on the other side, but having a heart that continually sought him to be at his follow his commands and to do his will, what he wanted was the complete thing that he was looking for, right? And so now we see that was Jeroboam with the rest of Israel. So now we go to Rehoboam, who was the ruler of Judah. And it said that he too and the people did what was evil in the Lord's sight because they built for themselves pagan shrines and set up pillars and Asherah poles that they also was worshiping that. And it said they even were male and female shrine prostitutes throughout the land. The people imitated the detestable practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. So now these are the people that actually have the temple that Solomon built. So it was one of those things where this temple, it was so important because it was a place that God could come and dwell and that the people could come and have a proper form of worship as far as their sacrifices and just bringing everything to the Lord. But even with this great temple that was built better than anything else in the land, people still took it upon themselves to have these other shrines, these other things erected. And it became a thing where they said people now throughout the land, like this was one of the things that they decided, a position that they took, right? And so, because of that, God allowed for the king of Egypt to come and actually attack Jerusalem. And not only did he attack Jerusalem, but he stole everything and said he ransacked. That's this version of the Bible that we're doing our devotion out of the Thrive Bible is NIV. And so it actually says that that place was allowed to be ransacked. So it was like he took everything. So all of the possessions that had been provided and come from a generation before Solomon to even have now in one instant was all taken away. But it was one of those things where you didn't have the respect for the actual temple itself and what it was there for. So all of that other stuff wasn't something that was of real value to the people. So God allowed it to be taken away. So let's learn how to value the things that, God has given us, Lord, and the people who have gone before us, Father God, and spent time in His presence that they have laid out for us, Lord. Let us not disvalue it. Let us learn how to just stop and always come back and give that, right? And so, one of the things that keep coming up, because when it comes to the history that's in the Bible, there's also other history that's being referenced. And I haven't had a chance to go look into that, but I definitely want to, because when it talks about the kings, it says that the rest of the things that happened during their rule can be found in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. And then we see the book of the history of the kings of Judah, right? So now we see that we have new rulers riding up, right? And so we see in Judah we have Abijam, Lord forgive me, who is now ruling over Judah, right? And it said that he reigned in Jerusalem for 3 years. And his, and it said who he was, right? And and it was saying again back to David because God is still looking for David's house. And he said again that David had done what was pleasing to the Lord's sight and obeyed the Lord's command throughout his life. And then he gave the one exception in the affair concerning Uriah the Hittite, right? And so we know that now there begin to be wars between Israel and Jerusalem, right? And that was what actually had started because we saw earlier that, they came out and they was like, why be at war with each other when, you guys shouldn't be killing your relatives. And that was something that was said before because remember, it's almost like you have a whole world out there still that's coming against you. There was no reason to come against each other, but now we see that that's becoming a common thing between them, right? And so now we get a new king in Asa, named Asa in Judah. And this is the first time where we see that Asa did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight and as his ancestor David. So there was some hope. And one of the things that we see with King Asa is that he held so dear what was of God that he went against his grandmother. And I know that this is one of the things where you see that people still have respect for the people who are before them. But it was said that the what the grandmother had done was that she had put up a shrine, right? Um, and it was an Asherah pole, and it was something that was seen as obscene to God. So he cut it down and he burned it. And it was one of those things that, he was like, it was unacceptable to him. And he deposed her. Like basically, he took her from her position as, who she thought she was because of this obscenity that she had for God. And so he responded, he removed and at this time, there was constant war again between now Judah and Israel. So what Asa did was he removed all the silver and gold that was left, right, in the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, and he sent it to have a treaty with another nation because he was like the nation of Israel is only coming up against me because they have your support. But he sent that offering ahead to say, make the treaty with me so that they'll stop attacking me. And in doing that, he was successful and he was able to win over the support of the the other king, and that treaty allowed for that king now to actually go and attack Israel. And so one of the things that we found out earlier in chapter 15 was that when the wife of Jeroboam went to the prophet, it was said that because of what he had done in Israel, that the son that was sick that he was asking about would surely die, but he would have the only proper burial. But it was also said that everybody else would lose their life, including all of his other sons. And this was actually accomplished, right? And it was so that king actually went and he killed uh Nadab the son, and he had killed not one of the royal family was left. And we see that this was a fulfillment in what God had said because of the sins that was committed. And it wasn't just about the kings committing sins against God, but that they also allowed for his people to commit a sin against him. So it was one of those things that they had this title that was actually given to them because that was how things happened. It was like God picked and God allowed. But then it was like they didn't go back to God and acknowledge him for who he was and to submit and to do the things that God was asking them to do. So there was nothing for the people to hold on to. So now the people are committing great sins against God, not just the kings, but the people. And so we see that this is something that was just continuing on and it had great consequences, right? So as I started today with when you actually get into this and you see all of the things that's going on, it was like what stood out the most. And this was what the heart that God was after. And that was the heart of David. And that's what made me knowing that made my worship yesterday when I was singing that song that much better. So I'm just saying that when you get into the word and you allow it to like bless your life, to renew your mind, your spirit, like when you come together with other things, there's going to be a pouring out that's just going to be amazing. So I enjoyed spending this time with you guys now, and I will see you later.